Hello, and welcome to Asia Center's Big Ideas, the podcast series about civil society in contemporary Asia. I'm your host, Kelvin Param. In the world of regional policy, we are used to the heavy hitting reports of traditional think tanks and academic institutions. Yet these bodies are often restricted by academic conventions or institutional risk management that prevent them from engaging directly with the most sensitive political issues. To challenge power effectively, civil society requires a different kind of infrastructure, one that prioritizes evidence that is timely, relevant, and grounded in the realities of civic action. As the founder of an institute built on the principle of freedom from academia, James Gomez has spent a decade pioneering a model where expertise is accumulated collectively rather than dispersed across isolated projects. But how does he draw the line between his own academic background and this new mode of civil society research? How is stakeholder validation implemented on the ground to ensure accuracy without the ivory tower? And can this shared knowledge infrastructure truly empower the next generation of leaders? Joining me today to explore the logic behind Asia Center is its founder and regional director, Dr. James Gomez. James, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kelvin. Yeah, good to be here.
So, Asia Center was established in 2015 as a civil society research institute. What was the specific logic behind the establishment of Asia Center? And how does your approach differ from the traditional think tanks such as the Asia Development Bank Institute or ADBI or the KSI Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific?
Thank you, Kevin. I have been observing the civil society landscape for a long time, including research on civil society. And the one thing that was very glaring was the research outputs on civil society were divorced from the groups that were implementing the findings of the research. What I saw was civil society organizations or projects had research components built into them, but these research components were simply farmed out to consultants and individual academics. So, what was happening in the field was the production of knowledge for civil society to act on, but it was separated from civil society itself. And I think that was the gap. And there are, a range of, institutes or think tanks around us, but they often focus on, geopolitical issues, security issues, or in the case of the ADBI and KSI that you mentioned, they focus more on economic and development, perhaps leadership. And their beneficiaries often tend to be governments, civil servants, academics, and civil society was a very, very small slither of their end beneficiaries. At Asia Center, we mainstream civil society as the beneficiary of what we do, both in terms of the recipient of knowledge, but also the capacity building that would come out of the knowledge, including advocacy. So that's the fundamental difference, and that's why Asia Center has a unique position as a civil society research institute.
You've posited that challenging abuses of power requires timely and relevant evidence to be credible. So, can you share an example of how having the right data at the right time significantly increases a civil society group's influence? And how does that empirical evidence change the dynamic when engaging with, say, skeptical local governments or international partners?
Yeah, I'll give you an example from the case of Thailand. Um, 2 elections ago, Asia Center undertook a research on the anticipation of fake news that will come out during the Thai elections. So what we did was we traced the elections for a good, 5 to 6 cycles from the time the internet became popular in Thailand, and we were able to, record and identify key types of fake news that were, coming out during each election cycle. For instance, there would always be something said negatively about civil society election watch strategies, for example. That was always a consistent feature. Or there will always be some negative campaigning against women candidates. So we were able to, first of all, identify that. And secondly, we were also able to identify the biggest purveyor of the fake news was the military, because they wanted to have a good stranglehold on power. So they were generating fake news against, election candidates, certain types of progressive political parties, and civil society actors. So we released this report just before the elections, and it was quite electric in the sense that there was a strong media pickup. Political parties were also present during the launch. We also had, the summary of the findings translated in Thai and circulated. So what happened was just before the elections, whoever was going to engage in fake news were already outed through the report. So how do governments or international partners behave in such a circumstances? International partners then, of course, if they are on the side of democracy and human rights, they welcome this report. They think it's good, so on and so forth. Governments, if they are generally directly guilty or indirectly guilty for some of this fake news during elections, then they will offer explanations. They will offer and give excuses on why this information came out and provide the rationale. In the Thai case, it was positioned as protecting the monarchy, as opposed to, that was the purpose, right, on putting out positive news as opposed to negatively attack civil society or other political parties and election candidates. So that's how it stays out, and this is where I think evidence-based research, provided in a timely manner, can be extremely effective.
That was a great example, and what I'd like to do now is to drill down further into the procedures and processes that Asia Center uses to do its reporting work. So in January this year, Asia Center published several country reports about climate disinformation and its impact on indigenous peoples. And I think we could drill down into the methodology used in producing one of these reports to flesh out some of the ideas we'll be exploring in the rest of this interview. As an aside, the link to this report will be included in the show notes. So please give us a potted account about how the report about climate disinformation in Malaysia was put together. How did Asia Center ensure the accuracy of this and other reports?
Okay, thanks for that question, Kelvin. I'll take this in two parts. The first part, just about the methodology around the series. We did 6 countries and a regional report under the series. And we took the participatory approach, when you speak about methodology. So it was the participatory research methodology that we deployed in this collection of reports. And there are 3 steps. In the first step, we have a sense of, how we want to approach the research. We have, certain approaches around secondary and primary sources, desk research. We considered including surveys, key informant interviews, and focus group discussions. Once we have the design, we actually engage with stakeholders such as CSOs working in the areas of disinformation or with indigenous people, and also within the champions from the indigenous community as well. And we give them a presentation and get their input in terms of what they thought about the research design. In this project, the feedback we got was perhaps the survey was not so important as opposed to the primacy of the key informant interviews. So we took those things on board, and then we were also pointed towards perhaps looking at some reports from the UN around the human rights mechanism and what was reported on behalf of indigenous people in each of the countries. So that's phase one. So phase two is really the hardcore participation of the stakeholders, often through key informant interviews. So we speak to stakeholders, and in this series, the voices of the stakeholders are littered throughout the report, so that as you read the report, their voices actually jump to you in terms of what they think about the issue. Focus group discussions were also useful in this way because it allows members of the community or those who work with the community to also raise their opinions. Last but not least in this process of participatory research is actually the validation process. So when we have the first full cut of the research report and the findings, we do a convening, and then we present the preliminary results, and then we test it against the community's own knowledge and experience, and we get a little bit of steer and bearing in terms of the findings and whether we missed anything or whether there were any nuances that we need to add. So that in a package is the methodology, and that's how we approach this whole series on climate disinformation and indigenous people. Specifically on Malaysia, I think the key issue there was this juxtaposition between the terms Bumiputra and indigenous people. Now, the term Bumiputra actually, encompasses indigenous people in the context of Malaysia. And Bumiputra here means, sons of the soil, and that largely refers to the Malay Muslim population. But however, our research showed that there was a distinction because while the indigenous people who were there, historically, they felt, and third-party analysis also pointed to the fact that within the Bumiputra category, indigenous people often felt or were treated as second class within the Bumiputra category. So we need to do a little bit more digging, a bit more verification by speaking to more people, because this is also a legal and technical issue stated in the Constitution and laws. So we had to also speak to constitutional lawyers to get a sense of the accuracy, because one of the things we take pride in the methodology at Asia Center as much as we can is to endeavor on precision. And I think this was one of the things we got quite accurately locked down in the report on Malaysia as part of the series.
That's a really great encapsulation of how Asia Center conducts its research and how it tries to engage with civil society actors. In some sense, part of that research is actually ethnographic in nature. However, you have also previously written and spoken about freedom from academia. I'm just trying to understand what you mean by freedom from academia, because a lot of your processes are also drawn from academic practice. So perhaps let us know how you see freedom from academia.
I've begun to use the word quite sparingly in the beginning, in the start of the journey of the Asia Center, and it's a lot more pronounced these days. And it never fails to surprise me when I'm in a room full of academics discussing academic freedom, and I mentioned the term, but Asia Center operates differently. We operate with the freedom from academia. And the whole room is stunned with appreciation and understanding of what it means. But as you asked me the question, let me unpack it for you. I think research is the fundamental key. And Asia Center, deploys research, evidence-based research in its work. But that work is not, housed in a government think tank or in an academic institution. I think that's the key. By locating it out, fully free from an academic institution, what we avail ourselves with is freedom from interference from political processes and whoever may sit at the top of a particular university, or perhaps even business interests if the university is privately owned. In many countries, privately owned universities often have political connections because you will need the license for a university, issued through a political process. You are also free from the bureaucratic numbness and control that place layers and layers of hurdles in front of you to undertake research, to process funds, disperse funds, and the lot. You also will have administrative control because in a university or a think tank, government think tank, there will be a hierarchy of controls and administration and supervision, and you will need to have those approvals in place. Often it's not about the quality of the proposed research design, but often about the content of the matter that's going to be investigated. And last but not least is peer censorship. As opposed to peer review, we don't often talk about peer censorship, and then this changes from context to context, political jurisdictions to political jurisdictions. So in that sense, we do not engage with the academic institution as such, and the benefit is that by not working with such institutions or individuals embedded in these institutions, we avoid all the ensnarement that may take place if you're part of that process. So that's in a nutshell, often what I mean by freedom from academia.
Thanks for that description. Right now, I'd like to focus on the matter of ethics. In a lot of university settings, before a piece of research is undertaken, there's usually a review by an ethics panel. How does Asia Center handle issues of ethics in the research that you conduct?
We have what is called an ethics standing order within Asia Center. Often we are asked about our position on the provision or validation of ethics in how we conduct research. This is often required as a separate document or methodology before one is successful in the procurement of funds or the finalization of a research proposal, because most of the proposals are often, commissioned by international partners. So I think that's the first thing. A quick insight into how that ethics code looks like is often anonymity, consent before interview, and to ensure that they are whoever is quoted directly or indirectly in any of our report is not identifiable. So those would be the major issues. On occasions, we would also will have to sign a waiver to confirm that we are not working with people with of a young age and who are vulnerable, and we are not, putting them in harm's way. So those are the ethics processes, and this was often, set up as a code, and that code would be verified during the process of the project approval. So that's one. But of course, we have ongoing processes. So there are internal review processes, drafts of reports such as work in progress, form part of the partner conversations, And of course, we also have the stakeholder validation meetings. So there are many steps and processes, sometimes, that are not really present in the traditional, university ethics committee process, which can be very far removed and impersonal at times. And there's no kind of, regular follow through in the manner that Asia Center and others who do similar work are put through.
A significant part of the work undertaken by Asia Center involves navigating the balance between diverse stakeholders. In your experience, how does the stakeholder cohort influence the research findings?
Right. It really depends on who's in the room in a stakeholder validation process. So if you had, the beneficiaries, and I draw on the Indigenous People report that we did, when you have the Indigenous community or CSOs who work in that process, or even, independent media, you get a very robust feedback. But certain projects, because they are also connected to governments, right? And here, if they are UN commissioned projects, then you will have to, as part of the validation process, also include relevant line ministries. So, for example, when we undertook an evaluation of the media landscape in Cambodia, working with UNESCO, all the media groups, independent media groups, mainstream media groups were all present in the room. But we also had the Ministry of Information, we had the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications, and then we also had the Ministry of Women Affairs. So that's where it becomes tricky, because there could be, political opposition to some of the findings, simply because, again, it's context driven. I think it's very different if you come from a robust multi-party democracy, but if you come from generally a one-party state, then there is a particular individual or singular speak about politics, about what is correct and the best way to do things. And when you go into a stakeholder meeting like this, there will be a difference of opinions, especially from the bureaucrats and government officials. So what happens in this process is then, and this often happens with UN Commission research reports, is then the report gets dumbed down. So meaning, in order to satisfy the discomfort or calling out by the, or even, potentially, they may not, sometimes lower level bureaucrats, don't say much. They come, they listen, they take notes, and then they go off. And opinions are given through the back door. So what happens then is the report is dumbed down. So that's the negative part. On occasions, the report doesn't even see the light of day, because the UN agencies are so paralyzed by the need to be neutral and to avoid any form of, pushback or blowback by states. They are handcuffed. So if we get involved in, working on research, commission this way, then that's always the danger. But what we do is we don't exercise the censorship. We stay true to the cause. We collect the evidence. We craft the prose in precise and language as possible. And then we leave the censorship or the dumbing down to others. At that point, it's not in control, because we are not the ultimate end publisher. However, if it's an Asia Center publication, then, we have a lot more wiggle room to accurately contour the research finding. And I think that also is a special signature of Asia Center to precisely and accurately contour the information we put out as best as we can based on the evidence that we have collected over a period of time, supported by the volume of resources made available for a particular project.
James, you mentioned stakeholder validation a little earlier, so we'll drill down a bit more into that concept. It seems that in the case of Asia Center's work, stakeholder validation comes in lieu of the peer review process in traditional academia. What does stakeholder validation look like in practice? How is it carried out?
Often it's, again, to unpack it, you would have at that point of the research a full draft of the finding. So we call it the zero draft. And then you convene into a room. It can be from 12 to 20, 25 people. It often may run between an hour and a half to 3 hours. And it will depend on the project, right? For in this instance, when we were working on climate disinformation and indigenous people, the type of people we had in the room were CSOs working with indigenous people. Indigenous people themselves, often, those working in a particular province or a region in which we undertook the study. We will have, because it's disinformation, so we will also have media NGOs and also people from independent media. And we often have other type of experts. They may not necessarily be country-based. They could be regional-based. Again, subject to availability and resources. So we put these people in the room, and then we present. We often present the finding of the report for about 30 to 45 minutes, and then we will have a panel who would be given advance copies of the report, a panel of between 3 to 5 people. These people would have read the report, and they would be reacting to the findings in the presentation. Yay, nay, adjustment, calibration. So they will give their opinions, and then the floor is open to others around the room to also give the input. The research team at Asia Center would take notes. Where there is permission, we may also audio record the proceedings so that we have clarity of note-taking. And then we revisit the notes and the report and see where may be the gaps, what we miss, what may have to be nuanced. And then we come with the final report. And the final report is often sent off to the partner for a final review, and then we get the sign-off, and then we put it out for publication.
That seems like a very comprehensive process. What are your experiences with actually conducting these stakeholder validation meetings? Have they been positive? Have there been intractable problems from some of these meetings?
Generally, they are okay because, you have people who know the subject matter, and everybody is friendly, positive. They know the value of the work being done, so they are there to support. They understand they are part of the process to strengthen the finding, because after all, it's so-called community endorsed. Of course, there will be occasional outliers who, some people just like to ask questions of methodology. They think it's a very smart question to ask. So, often my comeback is, have you read the report? And that's where you catch them out, because, they just, speak off the cuff. The other behavior that you can notice often is if someone in the room, and usually it's because of philosophical or political reasons, disagrees with the findings, then they will question the methodology. This is standard behavior protocol. So you will just have to manage that. discourse in a room, and because the discourse may be presented, almost always discussions are polite and cordial, but in challenged political circumstances, it can be a little bit rabid. So they will raise their voices and, wag the finger and say the methodology is all wrong. And there are no researchers, but of course it's freedom of expression. We allow them to express. But if the rest of the room can carry and support the findings, then I think the yeas have it, yeah. But we take notes and, we may add a footnote or record a different point of view. But often if it's not supported by the evidence, we say so.
James, you are a product of the university system. You have multiple higher degrees, including a PhD. How has that journey influenced your approach to how research projects are undertaken by Asia Center?
Essentially, I think we are true to the research methodology and evidence and the process. All research must have ethics in the way it sails, and then it must have quality control and validation. And we stay true to that process. I think all researchers attempt to do. I think what we have done is that we have removed the encumbrance embedded within academic institution or a government-owned think tank. So that whole membrane of censorship doesn't surround us. We are free to do as we please. We are free to think as we please. We are free to discuss within the premises of our offices comfortably without having to look back at your shoulder or being concerned about displeasing, a fellow colleague or a superior. We don't have that. So it's a very, very liberating, experience when you exercise freedom from academia.
You're listening to Asia Center's Big Ideas, and I'm speaking with Dr. James Gomez about the invisible dimension of civic power, which is the capacity of civil society to produce and use reliable knowledge. Stay with us as we dive deeper into how this collective expertise is being used to challenge abuses of power and drive democratic action in the region. James, you've written about producing research from within civil society, and you touched on that a little while ago. But perhaps, you could unpack that for us a little more. Maybe through a concrete example, tell us how researching from within civil society is carried out.
Right. I think it's the process, the three-step process that we have in bringing the research from the desk to the community and to the public. So in the first phase, it's the research phase, the desk research, the field work, the whole participatory methodology and validation. And then you have the research product or output. Thereafter, this moves to the next phase, which is the learnings. We transform the learnings into curriculum for capacity building of target communities. Again, I draw from the Indigenous Peoples Report, where our focus were for the capacity building of Indigenous community, Indigenous media, media groups, as well as CSOs who work in that same space. So we design the curriculum, but what we do is we do the trainer of trainers or master trainer module. So we conduct, high-level training. Often it's in English to the community or the trainers who are bilingual. So if we look at the case of Indonesia, we will have in the room master trainers who will be bilingual in English and Bahasa Indonesia. And then we provide the training, and then we share with them the master training material. And because the colleagues there who are attending the training are bilingual, they will be able to repackage the training material in local language and also deliver in local language. And that's how we move the knowledge to the ground. So the third component is advocacy. So here, again, we go back to the research, we go back to the recommendations, and the recommendations will identify to whom this knowledge needs to be passed on, who needs to be persuaded to do the right thing, so to speak. So that's advocacy engagement, and that may include, for example, presenting the findings to relevant government agencies. Let's say in the case of the media, if women are really found in the media and women needs more protection, the Ministry of Women's Affairs could be one part of engagement. We also can, peddle the findings to members of human rights commissions, just to give you a sense of the type of stakeholders we engage. We can also go and engage parliaments or political parties direct. Again, it would depend on the political context and how local culture is for engagement. So you'll have to read the room or read the country, so to speak, and also the resources, because some of it can be quite time and labor consuming. So it will all depend on that. And another component there, advocacy is through the media. So either the mainstream or traditional media, and as well as social media. So this would include sending out a press release on the findings of the report, giving interviews, writing op-eds, or doing podcasts, or having graphics and so on for social media to run a campaign for a week or a month to promote the findings. So these are the ways in which producing research from within civil society means from research, from capacity building to advocacy and publicity.
From what you've just described, it seems that some of the analysis that is done seems to be shaped by the demands of advocacy, and it's something you've written about before. And advocacy, like any form of human contestation, does usually come with an agenda of some sort. How does Asia Center work with this mode of analysis while yet remaining rigorous and objective in such an environment?
The advocacy question, or the need for some advocacy in a particular area, often comes across to us as a research question to be investigated, to validate whether that perceived area of advocacy is justified. I mean, all research starts with some formulation of questions and concern that we want to investigate, and then validate whether our initial concern is actually verifiable. So this is best explained through an example. We are currently doing a 4-country study on women. Women, we call them women religious rights defenders. They cover Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. I'll speak about Myanmar. So there was concern that women who speak up about religious rights, including LGBTI community, were suffering from a backlash against fundamentalist groups in their respective countries. And there was concern that one needs to understand how deep the problem is and advocate for the safety of these women, including how they can advocate better and not have put themselves in harm's way. So that was the advocacy point. So we undertook the research, and I'll show the case of Myanmar. So what we found out was, in Myanmar, since the post-coup, religious fundamentalism, especially Buddhist fundamentalism, has increased exponentially. Women who promote their religious rights, for example, in Myanmar, there are standing restriction orders for Buddhist women are not allowed to marry out of the Buddhist religion. They need approval. Just one example. And because of this, you find that women who advocate their right for free marriage across, belief system often find themselves under attack. And because a lot of this advocacy and content and knowledge sharing takes place online, women religious advocates, when they communicate online, face online gender-based violence, from hate to death threats. So because this issue is real, and now the need for advocacy is validated because the research was done and the evidence has been collected, so we do two things in this context. One, we offer women training on how to engage safely online. We do digital security training in that regard. And then we also provide support in terms of where they should bring their message to. So, for example, making submissions to various human rights mechanisms, or sending a submission to the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar, so on and so forth. And also, publicizing their plight through media and social media. So, the perpetrators will have less incentive to do so. So this is an example where there is an advocacy concern, which is then transformed into a research question. Then we go back and investigate and ensure we have the evidence and clarity that that is indeed the case, and then go forth to do the capacity or the actual advocacy.
And that leads us to how Asia Center engages with politically sensitive issues. There appears to be a rise in authoritarian behaviors, even in democratically elected governments in the region in which Asia Center operates. And in particular, we've seen backsliding in the practice of democracy in the Philippines and Indonesia, even though both nations achieved significant, hard-won democratic reforms just a few decades earlier. How is Asia Center able to objectively report on politically sensitive topics in such a milieu?
I think the question to ask here is politically sensitive for whom? I think research around democracy, human rights, have always been couched as challenging and difficult for people in the regions. And I don't here just simply say Asia, Africa, Latin America, Middle East, to name other regions. And therefore, it felt in the purview of Western international, research organizations, institutions, and so on, to articulate this because it was not safe for the locals. I think we are gone past that now, partly because these very institutions from the West no longer have the funding to do that kind of work anyway. So I think this is a great opportunity for many of us in the region, our region in particular in Asia. So now we have the bona fides to take this work ourselves, with or without a dollar. So I think that, again, what we endeavor to do is precision, research and putting out the facts clearly. And then I think there's always a risk. We have removed some risk. Again, I come back to freedom of academia. We have removed the political interference in institution, the bureaucratic checks, and then the peer review which can also be a form of censorship because of ideological or political, preferences and favoritism. So we've removed all of that, but we still have the legal process, which we are, subjected to as anyone. So this is where the nub is. Now, so far in the 12 years that Asia Center has been active, we haven't had an issue at all. In all our published work, we try to be accurate, we try to be fair and balanced as much as we can within the project design, the resources, and the time frame in which we are, given to put out a research product. But I think what keeps us standing is really that those around us do understand that Asia Center was founded by Asians, led by Asians, staffed by Asians, and telling a very much an Asian perspective to the politics of the region. When I say Asian perspective, it doesn't dumb down the research. It's simply because we have some of the historical and cultural nuances as well as access to language and peers who will speak to us, right? And because we are clear and precise, our beneficiaries feel comfortable to share information and knowledge to us because they know when we publish the work, the findings, it would not be dumbed down and it would be unadulterated. So because they have the confidence that we can bring their voice cleanly out through a publication or an advocacy or a media output, as the end byproduct, they are willing to speak to us. And I think that's the difference, and I think that's why we remain standing to date. But, the risks are there. We do our best to mitigate it, and you have to always be on your toes. But as long as, those around you understand you mean well and you want to speak truth to power, I think it's all fine.
So now we come to looking at some of the long-term outcomes of the work at Asia Center. How does embedding research within civil society organizations contribute to building institutional memory, and how does that help with nurturing new generations of leaders?
Asia Center has been running for nearly about 12 years. We have several, long-serving staff. Of course, we have people who come and go as well. But the whole journey of the research from start to end and the challenges faced over 12 years is now very much codified in terms of our onboarding for new researchers and also others who are part of the, curriculum development and training team as well as the media team. So we have codified the experiences. So every time we have staff, we are able to onboard them because the Asia Center is quite a unique organization. So it's not the same as others in the sense that the experiences that we get from specific projects are different. Although the broad process of research is easily identified as common across people and many other types of organizations as well. So I think that's the key. And for young people who have gone through Asia Center, of course, they pick up some knowledge on research. They, also pick up the idea of being resilient in doing research in difficult circumstances. Those who stay longer, several years, they're strong. They are an asset for the Asia Center and an asset also if they move forward. It all comes down to the institution in which you are housed. Like I said, Asia Center exercises freedom from academia. It gives you a very open, collaborative environment, so you feel comfortable to talk to your colleagues and your partners freely, and that's quite refreshing. So as long as that environment is there, people who have had the Asia Center research experience can thrive very, very well.
And finally, you've written about Asia Center's role as a knowledge nodal point. Maybe just tell us what the vision is and what Asia Center is doing to try to achieve this vision.
Asia Center has now come to be recognized as a civil society research institute. It is become a go-to for many organizations that want to have a particular piece of work done, research organizations, whether it's a one-piece work on the impact of AI on public interest journalism, or it could be a perception study. Perhaps an embassy, here in Thailand will come to us and say, look, we have this issue going on back home, or what's the perception of our country in Thailand, for example. So we can do specific studies like that. So we have become a go-to in that regard. But it's also, Asia Center has also become a long-term partner. So for multi-year projects, Asia Center is also sought after as the entity that would take the research phase of a 3 or 4 year project, where we will do the baseline studies, the research, develop the curriculum for master trainers, and then maybe do some regional convening. So in many instances, we are part of multi-year projects where we take the lead in the research. I can also see that we have to talk about resources when you speak about research, as resources reside, and so do international organizations move away from the different regions that they work in back to their capitals. There is a space there also for the Asia Center to become kind of a regional partner for international organization to undertake research and also do project implementation in partnership with national organizations. And I think that's the way Asia Center will evolve and head to. Of course, always with the eye on the market and the politics, and to see how the whole international and regional order, shifts and shakes. But we just have to be smart about it and navigate it to ensure we are ready for at least a short to mid-term survival, and then keep an eye on the longer-term horizon. Nothing is forever, but I can assure you that we'll be standing for the next few years.
Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to unpack Asia Center's model of civil society centered research. A little while ago, you mentioned AI, and I look forward to our next conversation, which will be about the impact of artificial intelligence on civil society organizations, or CSOs.
Well, thank you. Always very happy to have a nice chat with you.
That was Dr. James Gomez, Regional Director and founder of Asia Center. This interview was recorded on the 13th of March 2026, and it's published under the Creative Commons license, copyright Asia Center 2026. I'm Kelvin Param, and thanks for joining us.